Hello, and welcome to Women in Business, where we interview entrepreneurs and senior managers and show you the strengths, successes, obstacles, and roadblocks women experience in business. Since I believe every person in business needs to be visible, I'd like to invite you to watch www.sob6, that's the number 6, tips.com, which will give you some valuable information should you get the call to be on radio or TV, which I think is extremely important. If you'd like to contact me personally, drop me a line at Gayle Carson, that's Gayle, Gayle Carson 13 at gmail.com, or go to my website, www.spunkyoldbroad.com, and sign up for my weekly newsletter.
My guest is Kami Anderson, PhD. She is founder and executive director of Bilingual Brown Babies. I just love that name. Bilingual Brown Babies, a company focusing on fostering bilingualism in Black families. She received her doctorate from Howard University and is the author of Language, Identity, and Choice. And she has a co-author with her new book, From Sabotage to Support, a new vision for feminist solidarity in the workplace. Welcome. How are you, Kami?
I am well. Thank you so much for having me.
I just love that title, Bilingual Brown Babies. It just sounds like so much fun. Anyway, I want to ask you, your book, your last book is, a very serious topic. And so I'm wondering what really inspired you to write this book, From Sabotage to Support.
Well, really, it came out of conversations that Joy and I were having just as colleagues. We met at a professional development workshop that was actually in Spain, and just our observations of the ways in which we were interacting, because this particular professional development was majority women. So we were noting our interactions with one another. We were noting our facilitator was also a woman, how she engaged with each of us. And then Joy started having these experiences when she went back to her university in Washington, where she decided, I'm just going to do a TED Talk about this whole idea of how we just sabotage each other. And she did a TED Talk. And from there, this idea of the book came about. And she said, there's absolutely no way I would do this without Camille, because I think it's important for us to be able to have all perspectives, not just how she experiences it as a white woman, but what some of those differences are for women of color when you add that extra layer of ethnicity on top of our femininity and our womanhood in the workplace, and what that means with how we engage each other.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've been in business, Camille, for about 60 years. So you can imagine I'm an oldie goldie, and I was in business before it was even fashionable for women to be. In fact, they didn't even have credit cards. I had to establish credit by putting things on layaway and paying on them every week. That was how you build credit. And so I've kind of been through all of this, but I also have not, because I've always worked for myself. So I never went through corporate America. I never went through any of the things, the glass ceiling, any of that, because I made my own way. But I always did, when I taught leadership for women, I did find that women told me, not men necessarily, women told me that they preferred to have a male boss versus a female boss. So I'm just wondering, is the concept of women stabbing each other in the back to get ahead a cliche, or is there truth to it?
Well, the way that Joy and I see it, there's a toxicity that we have around the patriarchal systems that are a part of business, the very male dominated, male centered constructs that lead us to believe that we're in competition, because some of those constructs give us the impression that it's only us. So we're first and only. We're the first woman in the C-suite. We're the first one to have this managerial role. And we feel as though we have to guard it with our lives because of the way that the systems are set up. And how we respond to that can appear as though we're stabbing each other in the back, when really it's more like protection mode, because you're not real sure. You know that you're there precariously, and you want to make sure that you keep that position. And sometimes we do that at the detriment of other women. And one of the things that we talk about in the book is being able to look at our position as as an advantage for not just yourself but all women. How do you cultivate more leadership that are women? How do you cultivate more managers? How do you increase the diversity of the C-suite so that there are more women there and that you all are working together collaboratively, as opposed to feeling as though everyone is all out for self? That all out for self is more of a patriarchal notion that as women we tend to hold on to because we think we have to, but it's not necessary.
So, how do you think, uh, well, I'll just say corporate America, but it could be small business, medium business, um, the work world. How do you think that leaders can improve the conditions for women, and why should they? I know the answer to that, but I want to know your answer. And is there a compelling business case for inclusion and diversity?
I would say one of the things that we have found that seems to really work well with businesses is the idea of just having affinity groups, just having spaces for women to be able to talk about some of the issues and concerns, being able to find those places where they can build each other up. Not gripe sessions. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about opportunities for women to be able to find spaces where they can be of more support. So there might be the managers group for women with children versus the managers group for women without children, because those are two very different lives that are led in those particular positions, where the women are allowed to be able to kind of talk through some of the issues and concerns, but then also come up with solutions that they can then present to the decision-making folks in that organization in order to make sure that there's more support. It's better to have a group of voices as opposed to just one when it comes to being able to advocate for one another. And one of the things that we found is those affinity groups have been really helpful for organizations by being able to have those in place. Just those gives space or allows folks to be able to feel as though their body is more than just the role that they play, but the person that is holding that position as well.
Well, when you say that, it's even true that it's a difference between um, women who have children and women women who have children who are married and have a spouse, and women who
Exactly.
have children who are single parents. I mean, there's a big difference between that as well, because providing that the spouse or the partner is a support, hopefully that will make a difference. But
Right.
in your opinion, with all the study that you and Joy have done, how can women in the workplace be better to each other?
Well, one of the things that I think that we think is really important is really taking the time to not assume that all of our experiences are the exact same experiences. Being able to really understand each what it is that we're bringing into the workplace, what it is that as an Asian woman or a Latinx woman or a Black woman or a white woman, what are some of our experiences that we're bringing in? That yes, we're all female by identification, but there are some experiences that we have that are very different, and being able to understand what those are. So really taking the time to just look at what our history is, being able to take that time to really understand what it looks like for us to be Black women or Asian women or white women in not just our position within the organization, but just in society in general. And understanding that some of those experiences that we're actually bringing into the workplace or trying to mask in the workplace so that it doesn't end up being a detriment to us. And being able to have that type of empathy around the difference of our experiences is a great start. Being able to really know that feminism is not this blanket thing that everybody espouses to, that there are variants, there are levels to the types of feminists and the types of feminist actions that folks are attached to. And just being able to understand just even that basic history is important. And we do spend some time in the book even just giving that history, like the different waves, the branch offs, the break off groups, and all of that stuff, in order to make sure that we have a really holistic picture of what it's like to be female in the United States.
Well, it's so funny, Camille, because I was so naive when I started out. I mean, I was young. I was 21 years old. I didn't even know there was a problem because I just went into it full force and, uh, you know, gangbusters ahead. And so when anything came up, I mean, I just dealt with it and went on. And I never really acknowledged that there were a lot of issues that I dealt with, and there were, but I never really dwelled on them, if you know what I'm saying. They
Mhm.
came up, I had to fix them, and I did. So, what is the experience of being a woman in the workplace, and how is it different for women of color?
Well, and we have that extra layer of ethnicity that's there, of course. So it's not just that, there are privileges and there's power and privileges everywhere. And the way that those privileges work looks different as we go through these ethnic lines that folks are a part of, and being able to see that, even though, because I've had administrative positions in higher ed, I've worked in corporate, I've done all of those things, and it's one of those things where on paper, I look phenomenal to people. But then as soon as they see my face and they see the color of my skin, then my credentials come into question. And it's not necessarily because my CV says that I'm not qualified. It's just there are these biases and these implicit biases that start to come in because of that. And having to fight through that looks a little bit different than being able to have some of the other privileges that might not be associated with being able to be of a particular race or ethnicity. So understanding that, though, even those subtle differences, the difference between the ways in which I might request a day off versus someone else being able to say, hey, I'm just not feeling it today, I'm not coming in, and it being okay. But if I called in and said, hey, I need to take a day off, well, why? What's going on? Can you make sure you bring in your doctor's note? I mean, because we need to make sure that you're really taking a day off, and understanding that those subtle differences really impact how folks are able to go through work, and knowing that acknowledging those differences and acknowledging that those might be present is first and foremost. The acknowledging that those subtle nuances that come because of those that extra layer of ethnicity, just acknowledging that there's a possibility that that might also be true, is a good start to making sure that we're able to see these distinguishing factors between women when it comes to the workplace.
It's so funny because, I don't know where I was reading or I heard it or something, where now some companies are doing blind interviews where I mean, you're interviewed behind a wall or you're behind something and they don't see who you are. It's almost like The Voice, where you select somebody and then you turn around, oh, that's who you are. So,
Mhm.
because they're trying not to have any biases. And
Right.
so, they're doing it in a way that uh, put people in a more comfortable position. But what's an example of a great workplace today? Are there any? I know you're not a fan of Uber, and I'm wondering why.
Um, well, I mean, I'd have to because there's been so many changes. So many corporations are now starting to see the value of what it means to really consider the person versus the role that they play. That there's so many organizations that are restructuring the ways in which that they're able to really acknowledge who they have working for them as opposed for what they can do. That there are a lot of different companies that can probably be listed. I know there are times where Google has always been, Google tends to be the standout when it comes to different things in corporations, right? But there is a way in which they do have some intentionality behind making sure that their employees feel as though they are just as much a part of the organization as the executives, making sure that they feel as though they can see themselves in the organization. And most of the folks that I know that work for Google say, my company, and they have this possessive because they can see themselves in it. That's one that pops in my head at the top. But I'm sure there are countless others, especially with a lot of the changes. Higher ed is doing some changes too, and making sure that folks are feeling as though they're more than just the faculty line in the department budget, that they really are notable and necessary contributions to not just that university, but just to the discipline overall. I'm seeing lots of companies. It seems like every day a new company, I see some evidence of a new company that's trying to do things to make sure that people feel as though they are important and not just what they do is being important.
Well, that's great. I mean, that's wonderful and it's encouraging to hear, and hopefully that's reflected in their profits. So, so I know that we want everyone, our sons and our daughters, to experience true equality in the workplace. So, talk a little bit about what that might look like in the future, and do you think we're at all close yet?
I think a lot of these things, because we say it all the time, and sometimes I think we say it to the point where sometimes it might feel as though it's cliche, but we really do have to look at what it is that we're teaching our children in the schools, because the schools is that socialization tool for the workplace, right? We've had these discussions, there's research about it, that schools are prepping our kids for the workforce. So if that's the case, then we've got to be able to start to include ways to be able to allow children to be able to understand their own identity development in school. That's one of the things that we fall short of in education. Teachers get identity development preparation all the time. They're getting professional development workshops the whole bit, but it doesn't always translate into the classroom so that the students know how to develop their identity, so that they know what their place and what their contribution and how valuable they are to not just that particular classroom, but just to education in general, so that when they come out, when they graduate, they're assured they know what they need for support, they know what that support should look like, they know how to support others because they've had that training through that whole K through 12 process. I think being able to make some adjustments there would be a great start to making sure that we are working in the right place. There are teachers that do it in their classrooms, but we don't want to one-off it. We want to make sure it's a blanket policy in terms of education, that making sure that students are able to get that clear understanding of who they are and what they are able to do and contribute when it comes to supporting people, not just providing a product or service.
I think some of the schools are doing much better at that now. I
Mhm.
think we've got so much exposure because of all the social media and because of all the communication avenues and so forth. And kids are so sharp today on how to access all of that, that there's certainly a lot more awareness of what's going on. But if you were to say the major way that a woman sabotages herself, what would you say that is?
One of the things that Joy and I discovered were our own personal masks that we wore when we go to work. The ways in which we don't show up as our full authentic selves because we think that it might be a mark against us. So we try to hide those aspects of us. Being able to not fully acknowledge who we are and who we represent. Like, for example, Joy's sexual identity is not always shared with her colleagues because she doesn't know what that's going to mean, but that's a piece of herself that she holds dear, and to not be able to share that fully because she feels as though it might have some indelible mark against her is a form of sabotaging yourself because you're not allowing your full self to shine. I think the ways in which that, even I'm a mom of four, and the ways in which I tried my hardest, even in higher ed, to try to make it seem as though the kids were not a problem for things was is a way of sabotaging myself because that mothering is part of my identity. So
Yeah,
it
I mean,
needs to
kids are
be
going to get sick. Kids are going to have
exactly.
problems. Yeah,
Exactly. And I shouldn't, the mask that I wore had me feel guilty when my children got sick. And I think that was sabotaging myself. No, I'm a mom. And as a mom, my kid is sick. I got to stay here with them and y'all will be okay until I come back. But I think the ways in which I might have sabotaged myself was feeling as though that was some sort of mark against me. That my children, the kids get sick all the time. I mean, germs aplenty everywhere they go, right? So they're always going to
exactly.
something.
And one's going to
But
give it to the other, and
exactly. And it rotates, especially when you have multiple children. Those germs are going child to child to child. You might be out for a good week with
that's right.
children when
That's
you have
right.
multiples. But I think the ways in which I sabotage myself is making it seem as though that was somehow a mark against me. but it wasn't. It's an asset. There are ways in which me having that mother identity was a benefit to my students when I was teaching them in the classroom. There's a way in which that mothering identity allowed me to be able to relate to the parents that were bringing their freshman babies in, their first year babies, and leaving them on campus and entrusting them in my care. And those are assets to be able to have those types of interactions, and being able to really fully embrace that at work would have made a huge difference in terms of how I engage with my students, their parents, and also my colleagues.
That's true. That's very true. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Camille. Um, what you've had to do to get where you are, and your background and that kind of thing.
Okay, I am, as I just said, I was a mom of four. I am a lover of the color orange. And I, I think that's important. Folks need to know that. But I got my bachelor's in Spanish from Spelman College. And my master's is in international communication and cultural anthropology. I got that from American University. And you said my PhD is in communication and culture from Howard University. I have worked in relief and development. I worked in relief and development after my master's program, where I spent a good deal of time in Latin America. And I also taught in the secondary classroom. So I taught middle school and high school Spanish for a few years as well before going back for my PhD. So my background has always been around the interactions of people and how our experiences really do indicate how we're able to just function with one another. So that's always been a passion of mine. And my research interest looks at how language and identity really play a huge impact on how we see ourselves in this world. And just changes in just the languages we speak can have an impact on that as well.
Well, that's fantastic. Wow. Well, we've got just a few minutes left, and I want people to know how they can reach you, maybe Joy as well, and where they can get your book. And if you'd like to offer anything to our guests, our listeners, that's certainly okay as well. So how can people reach you?
You can reach me on anything Bilingual Brown Babies on all social media platforms. So Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, Bilingual Brown Babies is the best way to find me. And my email is bilingualbrownbabies@CamilleJAndersonPhD.com. Joy can be reached at joywiggins.com. She is in her email address is joy@joywiggins.com. The book From Sabotage to Support, A New Vision for Feminist Solidarity in the Workplace, is available on Amazon, so you can absolutely get it there. And you can feel free to leave us a glowing review after you have read our book and enjoyed it. We would appreciate that as well. And that is, you can get that also at your local bookstores as well. All Barnes & Noble, all of those are carrying it as well.
Fantastic. Well, there's one question that I'm going to ask you. You've got 2 minutes left, and you may not want to answer it, but just in case, President Harris or Warren?
I'm undecided at the moment.
Well, they're two very wonderful candidates, so you should be.
Two very wonderful candidates, and I'm looking at both of them with a microscopic lens to make sure that they are truly the best for the entire nation and not just one group of us.
Do you think a woman will ever get to be president? I think it's very interesting. They've had leaders in Israel, in England, in Ireland, and countries all over the world, and the U.S. can't seem to elect a woman president. I think that's very interesting. But
yes, once everyone is clear of how fabulous we are as women, they have no choice but to put us in office so that we can help make this world as fabulous as it can be.
That's right. That's right. That's so true. That's wonderful. Well, yeah, it's amazing. But if more people would be like you and like Joy and read your book and understand, don't sabotage yourself and don't sabotage the other women around you. And I love the idea of the affinity groups. I think that's wonderful because that's a way of supporting each other and doing it in a very non-threatening way. So I think that's really, really important. So again, if you want to reach Camille or Joy, and if you go to social media, you can follow her there. And you can also, on Facebook, I think you're Camille Jamila, and also your, as I say, I just love this, the title of your groups, Bilingual Brown Babies. I just think that's wonderful because that's exactly what we need, truthfully. So I tell you, it's just been a pleasure. Any last minute, 30-second message you'd like to leave our audience?
Really quickly, I would say just make sure that you do your best to stay true to yourself. And in those moments where you are not real sure what that looks like, grab a woman to help support you so you can walk through it.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's a great message. That's wonderful. Well, thank you, Camille. We really appreciate everything you've told us today. And
Thank you.
and congratulations to everything you do in the future.
Thank you so much. It was great to be here.
Thanks for listening to Women in Business. I hope you enjoyed today's show. And if you have any suggestions as to who you'd like me to have as a guest, just email me at gaylecarson13@gmail.com. Be sure to check out www.sob6tips.com. And in the meantime, go to www.spunkyoldbroad.com to see the resources I have for you.